The blood on his hands had dried to rust by the time Declan Voss realized he was riding away from the only woman who had ever made him want to stop running. The Arizona sun beat down merciless on his back as his horse carried him north from Florence, where he had left her standing in front of the mercantile with questions in her eyes and his cowardice hanging between them like smoke. He had made peace with hard things all his life, the death of his parents to cholera when he was 14. The 3 years he spent breaking horses for a man who paid in bruises more than coin, the bullet that still sat lodged near his spine from a card game gone wrong in Tombstone. But he had not made peace with the loss of Grace Porter, and he knew with a certainty that settled in his bones that he was not ready to, not yet, maybe not ever. 2 months earlier, Declan had ridden into Florence with nothing but a tired horse, $40, and a reputation that preceded him like thunder before rain. He was 26 years old and looked older, the kind of weathering that came from sleeping under stars more often than roofs and trusting his gun more than people. Florence was a mining town in 1884, growing fat on silver strikes and the desperate hope of men who believed the earth owed them fortune. Declan had no interest in silver. He had come because a man in Tucson told him there was work guarding payroll shipments, and Declan needed work that did not ask questions about the scars on his knuckles, or why he never stayed anywhere longer than a season. The Silver Crown Mining Company operated out of a squat adobe building on the east side of town, and the man who hired him was a thick-necked former cavalry officer named Morrison, who looked at Declan the way you look at a tool, assessing its usefulness and nothing more. The pay was decent, the work was simple, and Declan figured he would stay through summer and be gone by autumn when the heat broke, and the restlessness that lived in his chest started whispering again about horizons. He met Grace on his 3rd day in Florence. She was standing outside the church, not because she was religious, but because she taught school in the room the congregation let her use 3 days a week. Declan had been walking past, leading his horse to the livery, when a boy of maybe 8 came tearing out of the church doors and collided straight into Grace, sending the books she was carrying into the dust. The boy mumbled an apology and kept running, and Declan found himself stopping, dismounting, kneeling to help gather the scattered books before his brain caught up with his body. "Thank you," she said, and when he looked up, he forgot what he was going to say. Grace Porter was 23 years old with dark hair she kept pinned back in a way that suggested practicality more than vanity, and eyes the color of creek water in spring, green with flecks of gold when the light hit them right. She wore a simple brown dress and had dust on her hem and something in her face that made Declan think of morning, of new things, of starting over. He handed her the books and stood there like a fool, hat in his hands, while she smiled at him with a kind of directness that told him she was not the type to waste time on pretense. "You are new in town," she said. It was not a question. "Yes, madam, Declan Voss, Grace Porter." "Are you planning to stay long, Declan Voss?" He should have said no. He should have tipped his hat and walked away and kept whatever distance men like him were supposed to keep from women like her. Instead, he said, "I had not decided yet." She studied him for a moment, and he felt seen in a way that made him want to hide and stay visible all at once. "Well, Florence could use more decent men. I hope you will give it a chance." That was how it started, with books in the dust and a woman who looked at him like he might be decent, like he might be worth the chance she hoped he would give the town. Declan walked away from that encounter feeling something unfamiliar and dangerous blooming behind his ribs, and he told himself it did not matter, that he would keep his distance, that getting close to anyone was a mistake he had learned not to make. He lasted 4 days before he found an excuse to see her again. The excuse was a book. He had noticed one of the titles she dropped was a collection of Walt Whitman poems, and he happened to have a copy in his saddlebag, a gift from a woman in El Paso who had tried to civilize him and given up. He told himself he was just being neighborly when he brought it to the church on a Thursday afternoon, told himself it meant nothing when Grace's face lit up at the sight of him. "Mr. Voss," she said, wiping chalk dust from her hands. The children had gone home and the room smelled like old wood and new paper. "What brings you here?" He held out the book, suddenly feeling foolish. "I noticed you had this title the other day. Thought you might want another copy for the students or something." She took it carefully, running her fingers over the worn cover. "This is very kind. You did not have to do this. It is just a book. I was not reading it anyway." Still, she looked up at him and there was something searching in her gaze. "Would you like to stay for coffee?" "I was about to make some." He should have said no. He said yes. They sat in the small room adjacent to the classroom that served as Grace's office, drinking bitter coffee from tin cups, and she asked him questions that he deflected and redirected until he found himself asking her questions instead. She told him she had come to Florence 2 years ago from Philadelphia, that she had grown up with books and music, and a father who believed women deserved education as much as men. When her father died, her mother remarried a man who did not share those beliefs, and Grace had used her small inheritance to buy a train ticket west and a new life. "I wanted to do something that mattered," she said, staring into her coffee. "Teaching seemed like a way to do that. These children deserve more than what they have been given." "You are brave," Declan said, and meant it. She laughed, a soft sound that made him think of rain on canvas. "I am terrified most of the time, but I think maybe that is what brave means, being scared and doing it anyway." He thought about that after he left, thought about it while he rode guard on a silver shipment to Phoenix, thought about it when he lay in his rented room above the saloon and listened to the sounds of men drinking away their loneliness. He thought about Grace Porter and her quiet bravery, and the way she had looked at him like he was someone worth talking to, worth knowing. He started finding more excuses to see her. He would walk past the church when school let out, and sometimes she would wave and he would stop, and they would talk about small things, the weather and the town and nothing that mattered, except that it gave him a reason to hear her voice. Once, she asked him to fix a broken window shutter, and he spent an hour working while she graded papers, the silence between them comfortable in a way that surprised him. "You are good with your hands," she said when he finished. "I have had practice." "Where did you grow up, Declan?" He wiped his hands on his pants, not looking at her. "Kansas, mostly. A farm outside Abilene until my parents died. After that, wherever I could find work." "I am sorry about your parents. It was a long time ago. That does not make it hurt less." He looked at her then, at the understanding in her face, and felt something crack open inside him. "No," he said quietly, "it does not." By the time summer settled fully over Florence, bringing heat that shimmered off the ground and turned midday into something to be endured rather than enjoyed, Declan had stopped pretending he was not falling for Grace Porter. He had stopped pretending to himself, at least. To her, he remained careful, keeping a distance that felt safe even as it killed him. She must have known. Women like Grace always knew. But she did not push, did not demand, just kept being herself, bright and steady as a lantern in fog, and Declan found himself orienting his entire life around the moments he could be near her. The change came on a Saturday in late July. Morrison sent Declan to guard a payroll delivery that was coming in on the afternoon stage. It was supposed to be routine, the kind of job that involved more standing around than action. But when the stage rolled into town 2 hours late with an arrow in the driver's shoulder and a wheel half shattered, Declan knew something had gone wrong. "Apaches," the driver gasped as Declan helped him down. 5 miles south. They were not hostile, just wanted to talk, but the fool riding shotgun panicked and took a shot. That is when things went bad. The shotgun rider was dead, and the payroll was gone, and within an hour the town was in an uproar. Morrison wanted to form a posse, wanted to ride out and get the money back with guns blazing, but Declan had dealt with Apache raiding parties before and knew that kind of thinking got people killed. "They took the payroll because someone shot at them," Declan said. "If you go after them with violence, they will respond with violence. Let me ride out and talk to them." "Talk?" Morrison's face turned purple. "Those savages do not talk, Voss. They kill and steal, and that is all they understand." Declan bit back his anger. "I have traded with Apache bands before. I know some of their language. If they just wanted blood, the driver would be dead. Let me try." Morrison looked like he wanted to argue, but the mayor, a pragmatic man named Yates, intervened. "Let him try. If Voss can get the money back without bloodshed, that is better for everyone." Declan rode out at dawn the next morning with a white cloth tied to his rifle and his heart beating harder than he wanted to admit. He found the Apache camp where he expected, in the rocky hills south of town, where water pooled in the shadows and the land provided cover. There were 6 warriors, and they watched him approach with weapons ready but not raised. The leader was a man about Declan's age with a scar across his cheek and eyes that assessed Declan with the same careful calculation Declan was using on him. Declan raised his hands, showing he was unarmed, and spoke in halting Apache, apologizing for the violence, asking for a chance to make it right. The negotiation took 3 hours. In the end, Declan traded his horse, his rifle, and a promise that the mining company would provide supplies, flour and coffee and blankets, to the Apache band in exchange for the return of the payroll. It was not the outcome Morrison wanted, but it was the outcome that kept people alive. And Declan walked back into Florence leading a pack mule loaded with money and nursing sore feet from the long walk. Grace was waiting for him at the edge of town. She had heard what happened, heard he had ridden out alone, and the relief on her face when she saw him made his chest tight. "You could have been killed," she said, and there was anger in her voice, but underneath it was fear. "I was not going to let people die over money. And what about you? What if you had died?" He stopped walking, looking at her standing there in the morning light with her hair coming loose from its pins and her hands clenched at her sides. "Would it have mattered?" "Of course it would have mattered, you stubborn fool. It would have mattered to me." The words hung between them, raw and honest, and Declan felt every wall he had built start to crumble. He took a step toward her, then another, and when she did not move away, he reached out and touched her face, just his fingertips against her cheek, afraid of being too rough, afraid of ruining this. "Grace," he said, and her name was every question he did not know how to ask. "I know you are scared," she whispered. "I know you think you are not the kind of man who gets to have this, but you are wrong, Declan. You are so wrong." He kissed her there on the edge of town with the sun rising and his heart hammering and the certainty that this was the most terrifying thing he had ever done. She kissed him back, fierce and sure, and when they finally pulled apart, he was breathing hard and she was smiling. "I am not good at this," he said. "At what? Staying, being close to someone, not running when things get hard. Then we will figure it out together." She took his hand, lacing their fingers together. If you are willing to try, he was willing. God help him, he was willing to try. The next 6 weeks were the happiest of Declan's life. He courted Grace the way he imagined men were supposed to court women, with walks in the evening when the heat broke and careful conversations on her porch, and a tenderness he did not know he was capable of. She introduced him to her world, to books and ideas and ways of thinking about things he had only ever approached with his fists or his gun. He showed her his world, taught her to ride better, to raid the land, to see the beauty in the harsh Arizona desert that most people missed. They talked about everything and nothing. She told him about Philadelphia, about cobblestone streets and gas lamps, and a life that felt like a story someone else had lived. He told her about the years after his parents died, about the men he had worked for and the places he had seen, and the loneliness that had followed him like a shadow. She listened without judgment, and he loved her for it, loved her for seeing all his broken pieces and not turning away. He did not tell her he loved her, not out loud, but he thought she knew. He thought maybe she loved him too, in the way she would rest her hand on his arm when they walked, in the way she laughed at his terrible jokes, in the way she looked at him sometimes like he was something precious. Everything changed on a Tuesday in September. Declan had been working, riding guard on another payroll shipment, and he came back to Florence dusty and tired and looking forward to seeing Grace. He found her outside the church, and the moment he saw her face, he knew something was wrong. "My mother is sick," she said without preamble. "I got a telegram. She has pneumonia and she is asking for me." "Philadelphia," he said, and it was not a question. "Yes, I have to go, Declan. I have to take the train east, and I do not know how long I will be gone." He should have said he understood. He should have offered to wait for her. Instead, something cold and familiar wrapped around his chest, and he heard himself say, "You are leaving." "I have to. She is my mother." "And what about us?" Grace looked at him, confusion and hurt warring in her expression. "What about us? I am coming back. Declan, I am coming back as soon as I can." But all he could hear was leaving. All he could feel was the old fear rising up, the certainty that people left and did not come back, that caring about someone was just setting yourself up for loss. His parents had left, not by choice, but they were still gone. Every person he had ever let himself care about had disappeared, and now Grace was saying she was leaving too. "Maybe you should stay in Philadelphia," he said, and the words came out hard like stones. "Maybe that is where you belong." "Declan, what are you talking about?" "You never fit here, Grace. You are too good for this place, too educated, too refined. Maybe this is a chance for you to go back where you belong." "I belong here. I belong with you." She reached for him, but he stepped back, and he saw the moment her hurt turned to anger. "You are doing this on purpose. You are pushing me away because you are scared. I am not scared. I am being realistic. You are being a coward." Her voice shook. "You told me you were not good at staying, but I thought you would try. I thought we were worth trying for. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I am not the man you thought I was." He left her standing there, walked away while she called his name, and it took everything he had not to turn around. He went back to his room, packed his things, collected his pay from Morrison, and was on a horse riding north before sunset. He told himself it was for the best, that he was saving them both from inevitable pain, that Grace deserved better than a man who carried a bullet near his spine and could not promise tomorrow. He told himself a lot of lies that first night, and none of them made the ache in his chest any less real. Declan spent 3 weeks drifting north through Arizona territory, picking up work where he could find it, spending his nights drunk or sleepless or both. He made it as far as Prescott before he admitted to himself that running was not working, that the distance was not making anything better. He thought about Grace every hour of every day, wondered if she had made it to Philadelphia, wondered if her mother was recovering, wondered if she hated him for the things he had said. He was in a cantina in Prescott, nursing a whiskey and contemplating riding further north to Utah, when an old-timer sat down across from him uninvited. "You look like a man with regrets," the old man said. He had a face like worn leather and eyes that had seen too much. "I am not interested in conversation." "That is fine. I will talk, you listen." The old man signaled for his own drink. "I had a wife once, prettiest woman you ever saw, and she loved me for reasons I never understood. We had a good life, a farm in Texas, 2 kids. Then one day she told me her sister was sick back in Missouri and she needed to go help. I got it in my head that if she left, she would realize she was too good for me and never come back. So I told her not to go, forbade it, like I had that right." Declan looked up despite himself. "She went anyway, because she was not the type to be told what to do. And I was so angry and stubborn that when she came back 3 months later, I had sold the farm and moved on. Spent the next 30 years wondering what happened to her, if she was happy, if she ever thought about me." The old man took a long drink. "Found out last year she died, never remarried, spent her whole life teaching school in Missouri and wondering what happened to the stubborn fool she had married. Why are you telling me this? Because you have that same look I used to see in the mirror. That look that says you ran from something good because you were too scared to believe you deserved it." The old man stood up, dropping coins on the table. "Difference is, you still have time to fix your mistake. I would not waste it if I were you." Declan sat there long after the old man left, staring at his whiskey and thinking about Grace, about the way she had looked at him that last day, about the truth in what she had called him. Coward. She was right. He was a coward, not because he was afraid of hard things, but because he was afraid of good things, afraid that happiness was something that happened to other people, and not to broken men who carried too many scars. He thought about his parents, about how his father used to say that being brave meant doing the thing that scared you most. He thought about Grace telling him that being brave meant being scared and doing it anyway. He thought about all the hard things he had made peace with in his life, and he realized that none of them were as hard as the thought of living the rest of his life without her. Declan left Prescott the next morning, riding hard and fast back toward Florence with a plan forming in his mind and hope starting to flicker in his chest. It took him 2 days to get back, and when he arrived, dusty and exhausted, the first person he saw was Morrison. "Voss," the older man said, surprised, "thought you had moved on." "I need to know if Grace Porter came back from Philadelphia." Morrison's expression turned grave. "She came back 3 days ago, but there is a problem, son. There is talk about closing the school." "What? Why?" "Town council thinks it is too expensive to keep funding it. They want to shut it down, use the money for other things. Grace has been fighting them, but I do not know if she can win. Meeting is tonight at the town hall." Declan did not wait to hear more. He rode straight to the church, but Grace was not there. He found her at the boarding house where she rented a room, and when she opened the door and saw him, every emotion he had ever felt played across her face in the span of a heartbeat. "Declan," she said, and his name in her voice was a question and an accusation and a prayer all at once. "I am sorry," he said. "Grace, I am so sorry. I was wrong about everything. I was scared and stupid, and I hurt you when you needed me most. I do not have any right to ask you to forgive me, but I am asking anyway because I love you. I have loved you since that first day when I picked up your books, and I will love you until the day I die if you give me the chance." She stared at him, tears shining in her eyes. "You left me. I know. I know, and I will regret it for the rest of my life. But I am here now, and I am not leaving again, not unless you tell me to go." "My mother recovered," she said, her voice breaking. "She is fine. And I came back here hoping you would be here, hoping you had realized what I already knew, that we are supposed to be together. But you were gone. I am here now," he said again, and he took a step closer. "Grace, I am here now, and I am asking you to let me prove that I can be the man you deserve." Let me prove that I can stay." She closed the distance between them, and when she kissed him, it tasted like forgiveness and new beginnings and coming home. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her close, and felt something in his chest that had been tight for as long as he could remember finally ease. "I love you too," she whispered against his mouth. "I have been so angry at you, but I love you too." They stood there holding each other until Grace pulled back, wiping her eyes. "There is a town council meeting tonight. They want to close the school. Morrison told me. What do you need from me? I need you to help me fight. These children need this school, Declan. They need a chance to be more than what this town expects them to be. Then we will fight." He took her hand. "Whatever you need, we will fight." The town hall was packed that night with miners and merchants and families who had opinions about everything and solutions for nothing. The council sat at a long table in front, 5 men who looked tired and overworked and not particularly interested in listening. Declan stood at the back with Grace, watching as she prepared to make her case. When it was her turn to speak, Grace stood up with her back straight and her voice clear, and Declan felt a surge of pride watching her. She talked about the children, about what they had learned and what they could become. She talked about the importance of education, about how a town that invested in its children was a town that invested in its future. She was eloquent and passionate, and everything a teacher should be, and the council voted to close the school anyway. The vote was 3-2, and the head councilman, a wealthy mine owner named Garrett, explained it away as a matter of finances. "We simply do not have the money, Miss Porter. I am sorry, but the decision is final." Grace sat down, her face pale, and Declan felt anger rising in his chest. He had been quiet all night, but watching her lose this fight after everything she had sacrificed was more than he could bear. He stood up, and everyone turned to look at him. "I have a solution," he said, his voice carrying across the room. "What if the school was funded privately?" Garrett frowned. "By whom?" "By me. And by anyone else in this town who believes that education matters more than another round of drinks or a new horse. Miss Porter is right. These children deserve a chance. If the town will not give them that chance, then the people of the town will." There was murmuring, and then a man Declan recognized from the livery stood up. "I will contribute. My boy has learned more in the last year than I ever knew. I will give what I can." Another voice, a woman from the mercantile. "My daughter can read now because of Miss Porter. I will help too." One by one, people stood up, pledging money or supplies or time, until the room was full of voices saying yes, saying this matters, saying Grace mattered. By the end of the night, they had enough pledges to keep the school running for at least another year, and Grace was crying openly, overwhelmed by the support. Garrett looked furious, but there was nothing he could do. The school would stay open, funded by the community instead of the town. And as people filed out congratulating Grace and shaking Declan's hand, he felt something he had not felt in a long time. He felt like he belonged. Grace found him outside after the crowd dispersed, and she threw her arms around his neck, holding him tight. "Thank you," she said. "Thank you for believing in this, for believing in me." "You made it easy," he said, and he meant it. They walked back to her boarding house slowly, savoring the cool night air and the quiet after so much noise. At her door, she hesitated, then looked up at him with something serious in her eyes. "What happens now, Declan? With us? I want to stay in Florence. I want to build a life here with you if you will have me. I will have you, but I need to know you mean it. I need to know that when things get hard, you will not run again." He took her hands in his, looking into her eyes. "I made peace with hard things all my life, Grace. Hard work, hard men, hard losses. But I had not made peace with losing you, and I am not ready to, not yet, not ever. I am not going anywhere, I promise you that." "Then yes," she said, smiling through fresh tears. "Yes, I will build a life with you." He kissed her then, soft and slow and full of promises, and when he finally pulled away, he was smiling too. The next few months were a whirlwind of change. Declan quit working for Morrison and instead started a small freight business, hauling supplies between Florence and the neighboring towns. It was honest work that paid well enough, and it meant he could stay close to Grace without being gone for days at a time. He rented a small house on the western edge of town, a simple adobe structure with 2 rooms and a view of the mountains, and he spent his evenings fixing it up, making it into something that felt like a home. Grace kept teaching, and with the community's support, the school thrived. She added more days to the schedule, brought in more students, and even started teaching evening classes for adults who wanted to learn to read. Declan attended some of those classes, not because he needed to learn, but because he liked watching her teach, liked seeing her in her element. They were careful about propriety, always mindful of the town's eyes and opinions, but everyone knew they were courting and everyone seemed to approve. Grace was beloved in Florence, and Declan had earned respect for his role in saving the school and for his fairness in business. They were becoming a fixture, a couple people pointed to as an example of what was possible. In December, Declan asked Grace to marry him. He did it on a Sunday afternoon, walking with her in the hills outside town where the desert stretched out endless and beautiful. He had no ring, nothing fancy planned, just the certainty that he wanted to spend the rest of his life with this woman and the hope that she felt the same. "Grace Porter," he said, stopping and turning to face her. "I am not good with words the way you are, and I do not have much to offer except a small house and a hard-working pair of hands. But I love you more than I knew it was possible to love anyone, and I want to marry you. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep next to you every night. I want to build a life with you and grow old with you and be the man you believe I can be. Will you marry me?" She was crying before he finished, nodding so hard he thought she might hurt herself. "Yes," she said. "Yes, of course yes." He pulled her into his arms, and they stood there in the desert while the sun set and the world turned gold and red around them, 2 people who had found each other against all odds and were choosing to hold on. They married in February of 1885 in the same church where they had met, with half the town in attendance and Grace wearing a simple white dress she had made herself. Declan wore the only suit he owned, and when the preacher said they were husband and wife and he kissed her, he felt a completeness he had never known was possible. The reception was held in the town hall, and people brought food and music and well wishes. Declan danced with his wife, something he had never done before and was terrible at, but Grace laughed and guided him through it, and he did not care that he was clumsy because she was happy. As the evening wound down and they prepared to leave for their home, Morrison approached Declan, shaking his hand with a rare smile. "You did good, Voss. She is a fine woman, I know. Hang on to her. Do not take it for granted." "I will not," Declan promised, and he meant it. Their first year of marriage was an adjustment. Declan had spent so long alone that sharing a life with someone took effort, took learning to communicate and compromise and let someone see him at his worst as well as his best. But Grace was patient, and she was also honest, never letting him retreat into old habits, always calling him forward into the better version of himself she believed existed. They had their fights, usually about Declan working too hard or Grace taking on too many responsibilities, but they always worked through them. Declan learned that fighting with Grace did not mean losing her, that conflict was part of intimacy and not something to fear. Grace learned that Declan's silences were not coldness but processing, and that sometimes he needed space before he could find words. In the spring, Grace told him she was pregnant. Declan had never thought much about children, had assumed that part of life was not for men like him, but when Grace told him, he felt a joy so fierce it almost frightened him. He became obsessive about taking care of her, about making sure she did not work too hard or worry too much. She tolerated his hovering with good humor, teasing him about being overprotective while also leaning into the care he offered. Their daughter was born in November of 1885, a tiny, perfect thing with dark hair and Grace's eyes. They named her Catherine after Grace's mother, and Declan held her for the first time with hands that shook, terrified of dropping her, terrified of failing her. But Grace smiled at him, tired and radiant, and said, "You are going to be a wonderful father." And he believed her because she had never been wrong about him yet. Fatherhood changed Declan in ways he did not expect. He found himself thinking about the future differently, about what kind of world he wanted Catherine to grow up in, and what kind of man he wanted to be for her. He worked harder at his business, expanding it so they would have security. He became more involved in the town, serving on committees and helping with projects, because he wanted Florence to be a place where his daughter could thrive. Grace went back to teaching after a few months, bringing Catherine to the school with her. The students adored the baby, and Grace said having Catherine there taught them about gentleness and responsibility. Declan would sometimes stop by during the day, ostensibly to check on them, but really just to see his wife teaching and his daughter sleeping in a basket by the window. And he would feel that same sense of completeness, that same gratitude that his life had turned out this way. When Catherine was 2, Grace got pregnant again, and this time Declan was less panicked and more excited. Their son was born in the summer of 1888, and they named him Daniel, after Declan's father. Daniel was louder than Catherine had been, more demanding, and Declan loved him with the same fierce intensity he loved his daughter. The years passed in a rhythm of work and family and community. Declan's freight business grew successful enough that he hired help, which gave him more time at home. Grace eventually handed over some of her teaching responsibilities to a younger woman who moved to town, though she remained involved in the school and in every effort to improve education in Florence. They bought a bigger house, one with space for the children to play and a garden where Grace grew vegetables and flowers. Catherine grew into a bright, curious child who loved books as much as her mother did. Daniel was more physical, more interested in horses and building things, and Declan spent hours with him, teaching him everything he knew. They were good kids, happy and healthy, and Declan marveled sometimes at the fact that this was his life, that he got to have this. There were hard times too. In 1889, a drought hit Arizona territory hard, and many of the mines around Florence struggled. Declan's business suffered as there was less to haul, and they had to tighten their belts and make do with less. But they got through it together, Grace taking on extra tutoring to bring in money and Declan picking up whatever work he could find. The experience made them stronger, reminded them that they were a team and could weather anything as long as they had each other. In 1890, Morrison died of a heart attack, and Declan was surprised by how much the loss affected him. He had never been close to the man, but Morrison had given him a chance when he first came to Florence, and Declan felt he owed him something. He helped Morrison's widow settle the estate, and when she decided to sell the mining company, Declan found himself tempted to buy it. He and Grace talked about it for weeks, weighing the pros and cons, and finally decided to take the risk. Running a mining company was different from hauling freight, but Declan approached it the same way he approached everything, with hard work and fairness. He treated his miners well, paid them decent wages, listened to their concerns. It was not as profitable as it could have been if he had cut corners, but it was sustainable, and the men who worked for him were loyal. Grace helped with the bookkeeping and planning, and they became true partners in every sense of the word. By 1892, Florence was changing. The silver boom was slowing, and some people were moving on to other strikes, but the town was stable enough to survive. The school had become one of the best in the territory, drawing families who wanted their children educated. Declan and Grace had become pillars of the community, people others looked to for guidance and support. On their 7th anniversary, Declan took Grace back to the hills where he had proposed, leaving the children with a neighbor for the afternoon. They sat on a flat rock overlooking the desert, and Grace leaned against him, content and quiet. "You ever think about where we would be if things had gone differently?" she asked. "If you had not come back that day." "I try not to," Declan admitted. "It hurts too much to think about." "I think about it sometimes. I think about how close we came to losing each other." He kissed the top of her head. "We did not lose it. We are here." "We are here," she echoed. "And I am so grateful, Declan, for all of it, for you." "I am the one who should be grateful." "You saved me, Grace. You made me believe I could be someone worth saving." She turned in his arms, looking up at him with those creek water eyes he had fallen in love with. "We saved each other. That is what love does." He kissed her then, slow and deep, and thought about the man he had been when he first rode into Florence, angry and alone, and convinced he did not deserve good things. That man felt like a stranger now. Declan Voss was a husband, a father, a business owner, a man who had roots and a future in people who depended on him. He had made peace with hard things all his life, but the hardest thing had been learning to accept love, to believe he was worthy of it. Losing Grace would have destroyed him, he knew that now. But he had not lost her. He had found her, and he had fought for her, and he had built a life with her that was more than he ever dreamed possible. In 1894, Grace became pregnant again, a surprise given that they thought they were done having children. This pregnancy was harder than the previous ones, and Declan worried constantly. But Grace was strong, and in the spring of 1895, she gave birth to twin girls. They named them Rose and Elizabeth, and Declan held them both and wondered how it was possible to keep expanding his heart to fit more love. Catherine, now 9, was thrilled to have sisters. Daniel, at 6, was less enthusiastic but warmed up quickly when he realized the babies thought he was fascinating. The house became louder, more chaotic, and Declan loved every moment of it. The twins were barely a year old when Grace came to Declan with a new idea. "I want to expand the school," she said. "I want to build a real schoolhouse, something permanent, and I want to create a library, a place where anyone in town can come and borrow books." "That is ambitious," Declan said, but he was smiling. Grace's ambition was one of the things he loved most about her. "It is needed. We have outgrown the church, and the children deserve better. The whole town deserves better. Then we will make it happen." It took 2 years of fundraising and planning and building, but in 1897, Florence got its new schoolhouse and library. It was a beautiful adobe building with large windows and a bell tower, and on the day it opened, the whole town celebrated. Grace gave a speech, talking about the importance of education and community, and Declan stood in the crowd with his children and felt a pride so intense it brought tears to his eyes. This was Grace's legacy, this building and the generations of children who would learn within its walls. But it was also their legacy together, because Declan had helped make it possible, had supported her vision and worked alongside her to bring it to life. As the years continued to pass, Declan watched his children grow. Catherine became a teacher herself, following in her mother's footsteps. Daniel took over the freight business. running it with the same fairness and work ethic Declan had modeled. The twins were still young but showed signs of being as bright and determined as their mother. In 1900, on a warm evening in May, Declan sat on the porch of their home with Grace beside him, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. They were both in their 40s now, weathered by time and life but still strong, still together. "You ever regret it?" Grace asked quietly. "Staying here building this life." Declan looked at her, at the gray threading through her dark hair and the lines around her eyes from years of smiling. "Not for a single moment. You are my home, Grace. You always have been." She took his hand, squeezing it gently. "You are mine too. I love you, Declan Voss." "I love you, Grace Voss." They sat there as the sun disappeared and the stars came out, two people who had found each other in an unlikely place and built something beautiful together. Declan thought about the young man he had been, so convinced he was not worthy of love or happiness. That man had been wrong about so many things. The truth was, Declan had made peace with hard things all his life. The death of his parents, the years of loneliness, the violence and uncertainty of the world he lived in. He had survived all of it by keeping his heart closed, by never letting anyone close enough to hurt him. But then Grace had come into his life, and she had refused to let him hide. She had seen past his walls and loved him anyway, and in loving her back, he had discovered a different kind of strength. The strength to stay when he wanted to run. The strength to trust when trust felt dangerous. The strength to build a life instead of just surviving one. He had not made peace with the loss of her that day he rode away from Florence, had not been ready to let her go. The thought of losing her had terrified him so much that he had tried to leave first, tried to control the narrative and protect himself from pain. But in doing so, he had nearly lost everything. Coming back had been the bravest thing he ever did. Asking for forgiveness, fighting for their future, choosing to stay even when staying was scary. That was the moment his life truly began, the moment he stopped running and started living. Now, sitting here with Grace's hand in his and their life spread out around them, Declan understood that peace was not something you made once and kept forever. It was something you chose every day, in every small decision to show up, to try, to love even when loving was hard. He had made peace with hard things all his life. But he had also made peace with good things, with joy and family and the woman beside him. And that, he thought, was the greatest victory of all. Inside the house, they could hear the children arguing about something trivial, Catherine trying to mediate between her siblings with the patience of someone twice her age. Grace stood up, preparing to go referee, but Declan pulled her back for one more moment. "Thank you," he said. "For not giving up on me. For seeing something in me worth loving. You made it easy," she said, echoing his words from years ago, and then she kissed him and went inside to deal with whatever chaos awaited. Declan stayed on the porch a while longer, looking out at the town he had chosen and that had chosen him back. Florence had changed since that day he first rode in with $40 and a tired horse. It had grown and evolved, weathered booms and busts, seen people come and go. But through it all, it had remained home. His freight business was thriving under Daniel's management. The mine was stable and employing good men. The school and library Grace had built were educating children and adults alike. Their family was healthy and happy. This was what success looked like, Declan thought. Not wealth or fame, but a life well lived, a community well served, love well given and well received. He thought about the old-timer in Prescott who had told him his story, who had warned him not to waste his chance. Declan had not wasted it. He had grabbed hold of that chance with both hands and built something lasting. The years ahead would bring their own challenges, he knew. Children grew up and made their own choices. Businesses faced uncertainties. Bodies aged and health declined. Life was never static, never simple. But whatever came, Declan would face it with Grace beside him, and the knowledge that he was no longer alone. He had spent so much of his life preparing for loss, armoring himself against hurt. But Grace had taught him that love was worth the risk, that opening your heart was not weakness but courage. She had taught him that staying was braver than running, that building was harder but more rewarding than destroying. Most importantly, she had taught him that he was capable of being loved and of loving in return. That was the gift she had given him, more valuable than any fortune in silver or gold. The gift of believing in himself, of seeing himself through her eyes and recognizing someone worth redemption. As full darkness settled over Florence and the desert stars emerged in their thousands, Declan finally went inside. Grace was reading to the twins in the living room, their small bodies curled against her on either side. Catherine was at the table doing homework by lamplight. Daniel was already asleep, exhausted from a day spent helping at the freight office. This was his life. These were his people. This was what he had been running toward all those years, even when he thought he was running away. Declan caught Grace's eye, and she smiled at him, that same smile that had caught him the first day they met and had never let him go. He smiled back, filled with gratitude and love and the quiet certainty that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. He had made peace with hard things all his life. But he had not made peace with the loss of Grace Porter, not that day he rode away and not yet as he stood here now. Because she was not lost. She was here, she was his and he was hers, and that was worth everything he had endured to get here. The cowboy had finally found his home, not in a place but in a person. And in finding her, he had found himself. Years later, when Declan was an old man and his children asked him about his life, about the choices he made and the path he took, he would tell them about the day he almost rode away from their mother. He would tell them about being young and scared and convinced that happiness was not meant for men like him. He would tell them about turning back, about fighting for love, about learning that the hardest thing in life was not surviving pain, but accepting joy. And he would tell them that every moment since had been a gift, every day with their mother a reminder that he had made the right choice. That love was always worth fighting for, always worth staying for, always worth the risk. But that was still to come. For now, on this evening in May of 1900, Declan Voss was simply a man standing in his living room, watching his wife read to their children, feeling the weight and wonder of a life well lived. He had been many things in his 41 years. An orphan, a drifter, a fighter, a freight hauler, a mine owner. But the titles that mattered most were the ones this family gave him: husband, father, partner, home. Grace looked up at him again, and this time she set the book aside and stood, settling the twins into bed and ushering Catherine off to sleep. When the house was quiet and they were alone, she came to him and wrapped her arms around his waist, resting her head against his chest. "What were you thinking about out there on the porch?" she asked. "About how lucky I am, about how close I came to losing this. But you did not lose it, you are here." "I am here," he agreed, holding her close, "and I am never leaving again." "Good," she said softly, "because I need you. We all need you. I need you too, more than you know." They stood there in the quiet of their home, two people who had found each other against the odds and built a life that mattered. Outside, the desert night was cool and clear, full of stars and possibility. Inside, there was warmth and love and the steady beat of Grace's heart against his chest. Declan had made peace with hard things all his life. The loss of his parents, the years of struggle, the violence and uncertainty of the frontier. He had survived by being tough, by never letting anyone close enough to hurt him. But Grace had taught him a different kind of peace. The peace that came from letting someone in, from trusting and being trusted, from building something together that was stronger than anything he could create alone. She had shown him that vulnerability was not weakness but strength, that love required courage but gave back more than it took. He had not made peace with losing her, had run from that fear rather than face it. But in running, he had discovered something more important, that some things were worth fighting for, worth staying for, worth facing every fear to keep. Grace was his peace now. This life they had built together was his peace. And though he knew that life would bring more hard things, more challenges and losses and moments of doubt, he also knew that as long as they faced those things together, they could overcome anything. That was what love meant. Not the absence of difficulty, but the presence of someone who would stand with you through it. Not avoiding pain, but having someone to share the burden. Not running from fear, but having someone whose hand you could hold while facing it. Declan had spent his whole life preparing to lose things. Now, finally, he was learning to keep them, to cherish them, to fight for them with everything he had. And as he stood there holding his wife in the home they had made, surrounded by the life they had built and the family they had created, Declan Voss knew with absolute certainty that he had made the right choice all those years ago when he turned his horse around and rode back to Florence. He had made peace with hard things all his life. But the greatest peace he had ever known was this: Grace's arms around him, her heart beating steady and sure, and the knowledge that tomorrow and all the tomorrows after, they would face the world together. The cowboy had made peace with hard things all his life, but not with the loss of her. He never would, because she was not lost. She was found, and so was he, and together they were home,